What makes me even more proud is the fact that you actually, can you believe this, won the Princess Trust Young Achiever of the Year award for the Pride of Britain.
Yeah.
Trooping the Colour 2025 isn't just another royal parade. Behind the polished uniforms and parading horses lies a power shift that has left Queen Camilla in tears and Catherine at the very heart of a monarchy reborn. Every year, Trooping the Colour dazzles the nation with its rhythmic drumbeats, choreographed cavalry, and soaring regimental banners. It's the kind of grand tradition the British monarchy has relied on for centuries, both as a symbol of endurance and a spectacle of unity. But this year, beneath the fanfare and carefully timed salutes, something much deeper was unfolding. It wasn't the kind of change you'd see written into an official proclamation or read about in the court circular. No, this was the kind of change that speaks in glances, in placement, in the unspoken but unmistakable shift of power. And it all began with King Charles' frail but resolute choosing to send a message not with words, but with presence. Battling cancer, the king made the conscious choice not to ride on horseback as tradition demands, but to instead appear in a carriage, a break from protocol that many saw as both practical and poignant. It mirrored a similar decision made by his late mother, Queen Elizabeth II, who at 60 began trading ceremonial horseback appearances for more secure and seated displays of leadership. But this time, the focus did not remain on the king's physical condition. Instead, all eyes were drawn to the figure beside him, not Camilla, not William, but Catherine, the Princess of Wales. This was not a subtle moment. It was deliberate, bold, and symbolic. Catherine's elevated role at Trooping the Colour was more than a return from her own private health battle. It was a declaration. She didn't simply attend. She was poised, perfectly positioned, and entirely central to the day's narrative. With every smile, every wave, and every movement choreographed not by chance, but by quiet strategy, Catherine emerged not as the king's daughter-in-law, but as his chosen anchor for the monarchy's next chapter. And in the shadows of this elevation stood Queen Camilla, stoic yet shaken. The woman who had stood by Charles through personal storms, political skepticism, and relentless public scrutiny, now found herself sidelined not officially, but emotionally. Her pale blue ensemble, her measured expression, and her position just out of frame whispered a truth she was already grappling with. The center of gravity within the monarchy was shifting, and she was no longer its focal point. Those closest to her say the signs were there long before the parade. In whispered conversations behind palace doors, in carriage assignments that bypassed her input, in the king's newfound reliance on Catherine not just as a family member, but as a figure of public assurance. The cracks in Camilla's composed facade began to show. Silent tears, carefully hidden behind royal walls, became her quiet confession that something irreversible had changed. This Trooping the Colour was not merely ceremonial. It was transformative, a parade wrapped in symbolism, a signal sent to the world that the monarchy, for all its traditions, is not static. And with one deliberate gesture, King Charles had set the stage for a royal evolution, one that wouldn't be announced with fanfare, but would be felt in every careful arrangement, every choice of placement, every subtle gesture. But to understand why this moment rattled Buckingham Palace to its core, we need to follow the quiet decisions leading up to that balcony. A single change on the Buckingham Palace balcony told the nation everything it needed to know about the future of the monarchy. Those who know how to read the language of royal choreography, that balcony has always spoken volumes. Every year, it's not just a photo opportunity, it's a coded message. Who stands where, who waves beside whom, and who fades quietly to the edge. These are the monarchy's unspoken declarations. And this year, the message came through loud and clear. In a move no one expected, Princess Catherine stood at King Charles's right hand, a space traditionally occupied by the heir or the reigning consort. In 2023, that place had belonged to Prince William, the direct successor. But now, it was Catherine who held the king's side. This wasn't a logistical decision. It was a royal signal. A declaration made without fanfare, but impossible to ignore. In a world where every angle of a royal event is scrutinized, dissected, and decoded, Catherine's positioning wasn't missed by seasoned watchers or casual onlookers. It was intentionally meticulously planned and deeply symbolic. For the monarchy, which thrives on continuity and symbolism, that slight adjustment in lineup whispered the loudest truth. Catherine is no longer just the supportive wife of the future king. She is now a central figure in the monarchy's evolution, a bridge between tradition and modernity, between duty and relatability. Royal experts were quick to interpret the deeper meaning. Former royal aides and commentators like Grant Harold didn't mince words. They called it a deliberate protocol break, a carefully curated image meant to communicate Charles's confidence in Catherine, not only as a royal partner, but as a stabilizing force during one of the monarchy's most fragile moments. This wasn't just about honoring her resilience or her popularity. It was about succession. It was about legacy. Charles was letting the world know that, in his eyes, Catherine has already begun to take her place in history. But not everyone on that balcony shared the moment's quiet triumph. Queen Camilla, usually composed and poised, was seen just a few steps behind, her smile graceful, her posture perfect. Yet those close to her knew something was different. That subtle shift away from Charles's side wasn't merely a practical arrangement. It was a demotion in symbolism, a soft reminder that the spotlight is no longer solely hers. For years, Camilla had fought to be accepted, to stand as the king's equal, to earn her place beside him through tireless work and steely perseverance. But now, with one silent rearrangement, she watched her place quietly eclipsed by a younger, more beloved figure. From Camilla's perspective, the moment was layered. Pride in Catherine's rise, perhaps. Respect for her strength and popularity, certainly. But also, unmistakably, a sense of loss. The loss of control, of identity, of a position that once defined her royal existence. She had been Charles's, rock through decades of turmoil. But now, it seemed her presence was being gently but unmistakably pushed to the margins. Not with hostility, not with cruelty, but with the cold, inevitable grace of a crown always preparing for its future. And the public, unknowingly complicit in this transformation, responded exactly as expected. Their cheers were loudest when Catherine appeared. Their eyes followed her movements. Their affection, earned through years of compassion and quiet strength, was reserved for the woman now standing where the next sovereign typically would. That applause wasn't just for beauty or elegance, it was for symbolism, for the recognition that she represents not just stability, but renewal. But the balcony wasn't the only symbol of change. What rolled down the mall was even more revealing. Carriages in royal ceremonies are more than transport. And one assignment left Camilla reeling. From the outside, it all looked perfectly choreographed. The horses, the uniforms, the glossy carriages, each element chosen to reflect the grandeur of the crown. But inside the palace, there was tension. Not spoken, not shouted, but simmering. Carriage assignments, to the average viewer, might seem like logistics. To Camilla, they were loaded weapons. And this year, that weapon was aimed squarely at her place within the monarchy. When it was revealed that Catherine and her children would ride in the glass state coach, a vehicle reserved for only the most senior royals during historic events, something cracked inside Camilla. She and Charles, in contrast, had been assigned the Ascot Landau. Beautiful, yes, but it wasn't the stage. It wasn't the one seen by millions as the symbol of continuity, strength, and future. That coach had been gifted to Catherine. Camilla's first reaction wasn't fury. It was silence. A pause. A chill that settled deep in her bones. She knew what this meant. She'd spent decades learning how to read between the lines of palace decisions. In the royal world where nothing is accidental, this was no coincidence. Carriages were status, visibility, power. And this one, with its crystal-clear panels and historical prestige, was telling the world that Catherine was no longer just a future queen. She was becoming the monarchy's most visible heart. Camilla's unease grew as whispers swirled through the palace halls. Rumors that the decision had come directly from Charles. That Catherine's position, her coach, and even her wardrobe had all been carefully approved by the king himself. Camilla hadn't been asked. She hadn't even been consulted. For a woman who had spent years standing beside the sovereign as his closest advisor, it felt like erasure in slow motion. But it wasn't just the symbolism that disturbed her. It was dangerous. Camilla had long prided herself on attention to detail, and her mind raced back to April of that year, when 4 of the king's household cavalry horses had bolted through central London, spooked and out of control. Streets were cleared, officers injured. It had been a terrifying moment, one the public quickly forgot, but one that Camilla never did. Now, she discovered that 3 of those same horses, Tennyson, Trojan, and Vanquish, were slated to pull carriages during Trooping the Colour. And one of those carriages, the glass state coach, would be carrying Catherine and the royal children. Camilla raised questions. She wanted answers. Why these horses? Why this decision? Were they fully recovered? Was it safe? But the responses were vague, evasive. Palace aides shuffled papers and passed the concern up the ladder. No one wanted to confront the implications. Camilla, once an integral part of event planning and risk assessment, now found herself ignored and relegated to the edges of decision-making. Her voice, once trusted, now drowned in the applause meant for someone else. And so, the tension mounted. This wasn't about jealousy, not in the petty sense. It was about being pushed out of something she helped build, about being left behind in a system she had spent decades trying to uphold. It was the creeping realization that the future was moving on, and doing so without her input. And still, the carriages moved forward. On the day of the parade, the symbolism rolled past in plain sight. Catherine, poised in the glass state coach, smiled at the crowd as her children sat beside her. Camilla, in a separate, more understated coach, kept her smile fixed, but her thoughts elsewhere. She watched the reactions of the crowd, the gleam of the press cameras, the pride in Charles's eyes as he looked toward Catherine, and felt the distance grow. She was there, present in body. But somewhere inside, she had already begun to retreat. Her concerns about safety, her instinct for control, her questions about her own role, all unanswered, all dismissed. While the palace sparkled on the outside, behind closed doors, emotions were unraveling, and Camilla's tears would tell us why. When the cheering stopped and the curtains closed, Queen Camilla disappeared into a private room and cried. It wasn't the first time she had stood behind the scenes of history. Camilla had grown used to being the woman just outside the frame, supportive, dutiful, steady. But this time felt different. The applause wasn't for her. The spotlight never once turned her way. And when the doors of Buckingham Palace closed, behind the final wave of Trooping the Colour 2025, those close to her say she didn't speak. She simply walked down the corridor, away from the celebration, into a quiet room and let the tears fall. Not the kind of tears that demand attention, but the kind that betray a soul caught between dignity and heartbreak. Sources confirmed what many suspected, but few dared to say aloud. Camilla was overwhelmed not by the spectacle of the day, but by what it meant. For years, she had stood beside Charles, enduring public scrutiny, relentless headlines, and whispers that she could never be queen in the people's eyes. And yet, she endured. She served. She smiled through it all. Slowly, over time, she carved a space for herself, not one built on glamour, but on quiet loyalty. She earned respect the hard way, not by birthright or popularity, but by refusing to give up. And yet, on that day, watching the crowd erupt for Catherine, seeing the future reshape itself in real time, Camilla was forced to confront a brutal truth. She was no longer at the center of the monarchy's story. It was a complicated grief. Not jealousy in the way tabloids like to frame it, but something deeper. A sorrow steeped in pride and resignation, because Camilla, more than anyone, recognized what Catherine had become. A survivor, a symbol, a figure the public didn't just accept. Camilla had walked through fire for her place in the royal family, but Catherine had floated into it with the poise of someone born to lead. And that contrast, that cruel comparison, was inescapable. Camilla's legacy, once hard-won and fiercely protected, now felt like it was being quietly replaced, not by scandal or betrayal, but by time itself and In that moment of rawness, Camilla's tears told the real story. They spoke of a woman who had fought for relevance, only to watch the world shift its gaze to someone younger, more beloved, more symbolically powerful. The monarchy she helped stabilize through crisis after crisis was now evolving without her, in the frame. Not because she failed, but because the narrative demanded a new face, a softer face, a future face. And that face belonged to Catherine. Yet even in her grief, Camilla held on to one emotion that didn't sting pride. Because she had watched Catherine grow. She had seen her transform from a reserved newcomer into a formidable royal figure. And, though it pained her to admit, Camilla knew that Catherine's strength had become indispensable to the family's image. Her grace, her compassion, her quiet resilience, these weren't just traits. They were signals of where the crown was going. And Camilla, for all her efforts, now felt like a relic of the past the institution was preparing to move beyond. To understand why Camilla felt displaced, we must look back at the woman stepping into the light. She entered the palace as a shy, commoner, but today, Catherine commands a kingdom's attention with quiet strength. No royal handbook could have prepared Catherine for the storm she would one day navigate. When she first walked into the public eye, she did so under the towering shadow of Diana's legacy and centuries of expectation. She wasn't born into the monarchy. She had no aristocratic lineage to lean on. But what she did have, what no one could predict, was an innate calm, a steady presence, and a grace that would, over time, reshape the very perception of modern royalty. It didn't happen overnight. It wasn't flashy or loud. It was quiet, intentional, and now it's undeniable. Her transformation into a pillar of the royal family wasn't marked by spectacle, but by moments of profound strength under pressure. One of those defining moments came at Queen Elizabeth II's funeral. The world watched as Catherine, dressed in black, stood with unshakable poise beside her children. Her hand gently guided Princess Charlotte. Her eyes filled with both sorrow and purpose, silently instructing young George. There were no grand speeches, no overt gestures. But in that silence, Catherine spoke volumes. In that moment, the monarchy wasn't just mourning a queen. It was witnessing the rise of a future one. Then came a storm no one anticipated. A personal trial that could have forced her into retreat. Her cancer diagnosis, revealed not with drama, but with quiet dignity, shook the public and palace alike. And yet, Catherine didn't disappear. She allowed herself to heal, yes, but she returned on her own terms. When she appeared again in public, her presence wasn't simply acknowledged, it was celebrated. The image of her riding in the carriage, through the rain during the 2024 Trooping the Color became more than ceremonial. It was symbolic, a message to the nation that she wasn't just enduring, she was evolving. What many didn't see were the bonds being forged in the background, particularly with King Charles. Both are facing health crises, both confronting mortality. Their shared experience pulled them into a rare space of mutual understanding. Theirs wasn't a connection built on tradition or obligation, it was human, vulnerable, real. Those close to the palace say their late-night hospital conversations were filled with quiet planning and emotional transparency. And it was in those moments that Charles began to see Catherine not just as a daughter-in-law, but as an anchor for the monarchy's future. Someone who could carry what he would one day have to let go. And while the public never heard those conversations, they felt the result. With each passing month, their admiration for Catherine deepened. Her ability to show strength without aggression. Warmth without theatrics. Duty without complaint. The people didn't just see her as royalty, they trusted her. And in a world where public opinion can turn cold without warning, that trust is the rarest crown of all. But these moments weren't just emotional victories. They were building blocks of a very deliberate plan. King Charles has made his decision, and it's not just ceremonial. It's revolutionary. In the hidden chambers of the monarchy, decisions are rarely made in haste. Every gesture, every lineup, every assignment is a thread in the tapestry of power. But this time, the king wasn't following protocol. He was rewriting it. Because for Charles, the survival of the monarchy is no longer about preserving the past. It's about preparing for the future. And in that future, one name rises again and again, Catherine. Not because she bears a title, but because she embodies something far more vital: public trust. In a world increasingly skeptical of crowns and curtsies, Charles knows that symbols must evolve or crumble, and Catherine, in his eyes, is the evolution. Their bond wasn't always this strong, but it was in the shared vulnerability of those quiet nights inside hospital walls that something unspoken took root. Both battling illness. Both are forced to face the fragility of their roles. In those deeply human moments, Charles saw more than a daughter-in-law. He saw a partner in the preservation of something ancient, something at risk. Catherine didn't seek attention during those dark days, but her strength was undeniable. She listened. She encouraged me. She carried herself with quiet determination. And slowly, Charles began to see in her what the public already did: a stabilizer, a unifier, a modern monarch in waiting. That realization was not a matter of sentiment, it was strategy. Charles has seen the winds of public opinion shift violently throughout his reign. He knows the monarchy stands at a precipice, its relevance constantly challenged by modern expectations and generational divides. The scandals, the exiles, the losses, they've left scars. But Catherine represents the opposite. She brings balance. She stands at the intersection of duty and empathy. She connects, and that connection is the very thing Charles knows the crown needs to survive the next storm. Behind palace walls, aides began to notice the change. Catherine's input carried more weight. Her appearances were increasingly framed not as ceremonial, but as foundational. Even the public statements began to reflect it. When Charles praised her courage, when he subtly alluded to her as a force behind the scenes, it wasn't flattery. It was recognition. She wasn't just William's wife anymore. She was becoming the person the public turned to with faith. A woman who bore the burden of illness without spectacle, who guided her children with humanity, who represented both resilience and renewal. Charles's vision isn't just about tradition. It's about transformation. And he knows the monarchy cannot thrive on memory alone. It must reflect the values of a new world without losing its soul. In Catherine, he sees that rare bridge. She respects the crown's history, but walks with the rhythm of the present. She can sit beside global leaders and kneel beside a grieving child. That duality is her power. And in choosing to elevate her role on balconies, in carriages, and in public perception, Charles isn't just securing his legacy, he's choosing survival. But this rise wasn't handed to her. It was earned through moments that melted public hearts. It's in the quiet moments, a glance, a gentle touch, that Catherine has captured a nation's heart. While others have commanded attention with speeches and ceremonies, Catherine has done something far more powerful. She's earned love through presence, not performance, not grandeur, but through small human gestures that speak volumes. Her strength has never been about dominance. It's always been about connection. And nowhere is that connection more evident than in the way she mothers her children, not in the confines of a palace, but out in the open, where millions watch and quietly approve. In a world that often views royalty as untouchable, Catherine has redefined the mold. She's not just a mother, not just a princess. She's a pillar of modern monarchy, built on empathy and trust. Those iconic moments etched into public memory aren't scripted or staged. They're real. A gentle brush of Charlotte's hair courtside at Wimbledon. A calming whisper to Louis as he fidgeted during an official event. A soft laugh shared with George during a school appearance. These aren't the actions of someone performing royalty. They're the instincts of a mother first and foremost, who just happens to wear a title. And the world sees it. They feel it. In an institution known for its stiffness and structure, Catherine's warmth has been nothing short of revolutionary. She brings the crown closer to the people, not by stepping down to them, but by showing them she never forgot what it means to simply be human. It's why the public has embraced her so fiercely. Because Catherine doesn't parent behind palace walls. She lets her children walk beside her, sometimes out of step, sometimes messy, but always loved. Her approach is a departure from generations past, where emotional distance was confused for discipline and affection, was hidden behind curt formalities. Catherine changed the script. She brought vulnerability to the monarchy. She allowed the world to see her in unscripted moments of affection, of worry, of joy. And the people didn't just admire her for it, they bonded with her. The media, often ruthless in its scrutiny, couldn't resist capturing these fleeting moments. And instead of tearing her down, they did something rare. They amplified her grace. Not through exaggerated headlines, but through images that spoke for themselves. Images of a princess kneeling to comfort a child, of a mother guiding her family through overwhelming public events. These images became icons, not because they were perfect, but because they were relatable. In Catherine, the people didn't see a flawless figure. They saw a reflection of themselves, of what they wished royalty could be, of what it is now. And all the while, Camilla stood in the same spaces, beside the same family. Yet the contrast was clear. Camilla, dignified and composed, followed the model of duty above all else. But Catherine made duty feel intimate, accessible. The crowd's eyes followed her not out of obligation, but admiration. She made them feel, and that, more than anything, has shifted the emotional core of the monarchy. These moments didn't just win over fans, they repositioned Catherine as the monarchy's emotional center. She stood beside the king, rode in the coach of legends, and won over millions. Catherine isn't just the future, she's the now. In a monarchy once bound by rigid rules and silent tradition, Catherine has become the voice of a new era. Her transformation from a quiet bride to a commanding royal presence hasn't been accidental. It's been intentional. Behind palace walls, she's undergone rigorous preparation, diplomacy, crisis response, public leadership. But it's not just training, it's trust. King Charles sees her not only as an asset, but as a symbol of continuity that feels fresh, relatable, and deeply necessary. The monarchy isn't crumbling, it's adapting. And Catherine is its blueprint. She's not walking in Camilla's footsteps. She's forging her own path, one shaped by advocacy, compassion, and the kind of emotional intelligence the monarchy desperately needed. From mental health awareness to early childhood development, her growing influence signals more than ceremonial relevance. It marks a shift toward a monarchy that leads with humanity. Her presence is authentic, her power deliberate. And as her popularity swells, she isn't just admired, she's trusted. In a time when royal institutions are questioned more than ever, Catherine has become their most convincing answer. But all of this culminated in one powerful image: Catherine inside the glass state coach. That wasn't just a seat, it was a statement. That coach, with its polished glass and historic weight, didn't merely transport her, it elevated her. Every detail was loaded with meaning. The horses, once feared, now steady beneath her. The public cheers rising with every turn of the wheels. The glint of monarchy reinventing itself. It was Catherine's coronation in spirit, if not in crown. Camilla had once feared what that moment would represent, and she was right. Because it wasn't just a carriage ride, it was power in motion. A monarchy reborn in real time, with Catherine at its center. And when she stepped out, it wasn't just onto the parade route, it was into history. Did you feel the shift? Was it Catherine's commanding grace, or Camilla's quiet heartbreak that left the biggest mark? Comment below, and don't forget to subscribe for more royal revelations.